Okay, so chapter 7, we're only going to do some of the highlights of chapter 7. And this concerns knowledge representation, was what the book talks about. Book titles this knowledge representation. It also talks a little bit about this concept of imagery. We're just not going to have time to get to it in this semester. So we're just going to talk about some aspects of knowledge representation. The main thing that we're going to talk about here is this idea of semantic networks. So the definition here is kind of helpful. A hierarchical structure in the mind, in the brain, that represents concepts and their features through kind of like a web of connections. And so it's most helpful really just to see the picture. So there's an example of a semantic network. So like down here, semantic network following, this is a concept of chicken. And notice how all of the things around it are related to chicken. Clucks, which is the sound a chicken makes, I'm guessing. Pecks, which is a behavior that chickens do. Animal, which is, a thing. Chickens are a type of animal. Eggs, chickens lay eggs. Feathers, the parts of the chicken's body. So these things this is the chicken, and it's connected in the semantic network to concepts which are related to chicken. That's probably the best example here. But there's other, types of birds here. So robin, which is a different type of bird, has different characteristics. So this is semantic network. Ideas that are related to each other, concepts that are related to each other, tend to be clustered close together to each other in the semantic network. Here is another example. And we'll talk about this one in more detail in a second. I actually don't want to talk too much about that one yet. So semantic networks, hierarchical structure in the mind, representing concept and features. And so this stuff has been inferred to be going on in the mind. It's assumed that our mind is kind of organized in this way where different concepts kind of cluster in our mind close to other concepts which are similar. So another example, which wasn't shown in that semantic network, would be like the following things would be clustered in our mind. It reminds me of that game, $25,000 Pyramid. What is the category that I'm saying here? Car, truck, fire engine, ambulance, van. Those are all would be highly interconnected in a network. They all be close to each other because they're all part of the same concept of vehicles. So that would be another thing. So those types of things would all, like van and car, would be very closely connected in the semantic network, whereas van and window would be relatively far apart in the semantic network because they're not really conceptually related at all. This is the fundamental idea of semantic network. Things that are related to each other will be connected. They'll be close together in the way that they're connected in the network. And so researchers haven't actually seen these semantic networks in the brain. The brain is just like this organ. You can't actually see these semantic networks or these connections in the brain. They've been inferred based on cognitive psychology reaction time studies. So the structure of these semantic networks has only been indirectly inferred by studies, two of which are shown here. The first reaction time study I'll talk about kind of uses these true or false types of questions that people are asked. So you're given a sentence and your job is to answer, is it true or false, as quickly as possible. And the dependent variable is the amount of time it takes you to come up with the correct answer. And so we have these two answers here. A robin is a bird and a robin is an animal. In the experiment, participants are correct. This is true. And the next one is true. So people are, the accuracy is very high. Most 99.99% of the people get these questions right. The question is how long does it take people to get the correct answers? And the findings, which are surprisingly, strong, that is consistent, are that people are quicker to say that this is true. A robin is a bird. People can process. They can say that this is true more quickly than they can say a robin is an animal. And so to explain this, I will now show you, we'll just use this one for both examples. So we can see right here, we have the concept of robin right here. which is connected to the concept of bird right here, which is connected to the concept of animal right here. So this, we're kind of zoning in right here on this thing. And if we look, once again, people are faster to respond to a robin is a bird, and they're relatively slower to respond to a robin is an animal. And so these findings regarding reaction time have influenced the way cognitive psychologists kind of picture, or they think about how these semantic networks are structured. And you can see it here. It's because robin is physically closer in the network to bird. So therefore, once you see the word robin, it's kind of like activation spreads to all of the things around it, and the things which are closest to it get activated sooner. So I say the word a robin, which causes activation to spread, and that activation will spread to the word bird because bird is very close to robin. Animal, which isn't far from robin, but it's relatively further from bird. You can see there's a step, like that. Once you see the word robin, the activation has to travel further before it gets to the word animal. And so reaction times have been beneficial. A robin is a bird, is processed more quickly. Therefore, researchers think that robin and bird are structured close together in the semantic network. Relative to a robin as an animal, a little bit slower here. So researchers have assumed or pictured that in the semantic network, robin and animal are relatively further apart from each other. Any questions or comments about that reaction time study? Okay, and then lexical decision is the other type of reaction time study. And so in these studies, participants, the question that they're asked, they'll be shown a single word, or they might be shown a couple words on a computer screen at the same time. And the question, if it's a single word, participants will be asked, is the string of letters that you see on the computer screen, is it a word in the English language? So sometimes they'll see a word that's a string of letters, which is not a word in the English language, like Zerty. That's not a word. I just made it up. That's a word that's not in the English language. So you'd see that word on a computer screen, Zerty, and you would say no. The answer is no. Or in this case, the example showed here, they're seeing two words on a computer screen. Here, doctor and nurse. And the question people are asked are these words in the English language? Yes or no? That's one trial that participants might see. On another trial, participants might see these two words, like doctor and shirt. And the answer, once again, is yes. These are both words in the English language, just like doctor and nurse are both words in the English language. But the question is, in which of these two situations are participants quicker? It's all about reaction time. Lexical decision. Lexical, by the way, means word. Decision. So word decision. Are the letter strings that you're seeing, are they words in your language, in the English language for us? And so the answer for both of these is yes, but participants are significantly faster to respond to doctor and nurse compared to doctor and shirt. So the answer is yes. These are both words in English language. I can do that really fast. If I see doctor and shirt, I'm about 50 milliseconds, maybe 100 milliseconds slower to say that the answer is yes here. Could someone explain to me, why are people faster here to make the lexical decision than they are here? In terms of semantic networks, why would people be faster for doctor and nurse compared to doctor and shirt?
I guess because doctor is close to nurse on the network, so it doesn't take as long for the other concepts that are related to doctor to like activate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's really good. The assumption is that doctor and nurse, because they're related, they're both medical professionals, they work together. These are concepts which in the semantic network are presumably really close to each other. And so, well, the words are presented simultaneously. So it's kind of like doctor and nurse activate simultaneously, and they kind of help to co-activate each other. They're already close. One's activated, the other's activated. And because they're close, they like ramp each other up very quickly. Doctor and shirt, on the other hand, they're kind of far apart. And so they're slower to activate. They don't co-activate each other as strongly, as quickly. So the basic answer, cutting to the most precise way of saying this, doctor and nurse are close in semantic networks. Doctor and shirt are relatively farther apart in semantic networks. So yeah, these are the two reaction time studies. Yeah, I guess we have kind of a variation. So this is a variation on the lexical decision shown here. So I have these described. So the first one that I showed about, that was published in 1971. This is when the word doctor and nurse were presented simultaneously. And here are the results of this study. They're circled in, they're boxed rather, they're rectangled in red here. And you can see when the words are unassociated, like doctor and shirt, unassociated words, 940 milliseconds to answer. When the words are associated, doctor and nurse, people are relatively quicker. And you see a related finding down here for a slight variation on the task. They're asked a slightly different question, but the same basic finding. Slower when the words are not semantically associated, relatively quicker when the words are semantically associated. This is the study where the words are presented at the same time. Here's an abstract from a different study, and I described a little bit of the method right here if you want to read about it later. But that's what, so this new study, this is the next study that I'm going to be talking. It's kind of a variation of the doctor, nurse, doctor, shirt. And doctor, nurse, doctor, shirt example I just showed you, both of the words that you are evaluating were presented at the same time. But a kind of a variation of this involves what's known as priming. And in priming, you're seeing a word that a word called the prime, which occurs very briefly for and I'm talking about less than a second. So very quickly, maybe even like a fraction of a second, like 200 milliseconds. So a prime that occurs very briefly. And then it's followed by the target. The target is the thing on which you perform the lexical decision. So usually in priming tasks, you're actually ignoring the prime. And then you'll see the target, and you'll be asked to perform some task on the target. Usually it's a lexical decision task. Once again, lexical decision task. Is the target, the word you're seeing here, is the target the word? Is it a word in the English language? Yes or no? So the target is the word which is evaluated by the participant. Usually the evaluation is a lexical judgment, lexical decision. Sometimes they'll use other tasks. And so an example here, if I prime you with the word apple, so it appears on a computer screen for 250 milliseconds. So very quickly, the word apple appears. And then 1 second later, you see the word fruit, which is the target. And you have to do a lexical decision on the word fruit. Obviously, the answer is yes. We know it occurs in the English language. The question, once again, is how long does it take you to do that? And what they find is that if you are primed with the word apple right before the word fruit, your ability to perform the lexical decision task is slightly quicker compared to right here. If the prime is the word doctor, so you're shown that for 250 milliseconds briefly, and then you're shown the word fruit, and you're performing, once again, the lexical decision on the word fruit, your ability to process the word fruit, I mean, everyone gets the answer right. The answer is still yes. But the amount of time it takes you to come up with that yes decision is a little bit slower if the word doctor precedes the word fruit as a prime. Doctor is the prime, makes you slower to respond to fruit, the target, compared to when apple is the prime and you're responding to the target, fruit. Once again, you're probably catching on here. It's the idea of semantic networks. In a semantic network, apple and fruit are close together in the network because they're both kind of part of the same concept of fruit. When you see the word apple, the activation kind of spreads to the word fruit quickly. And so the word fruit is or the concept of fruit is activated when you see the word apple, so that when you have to process the word fruit, you can do it very quickly. When you see the word doctor, though, that's not going to cause the concept of fruit to be activated. And so you're a little bit slower to process the word fruit in this situation. And once again, the answer has to do with semantic networks. Questions or comments about any of the 3 studies that I've shown you that provide evidence for semantic networks of the mind? Okay. So here is a finding related to, so do we have the figure here? Yes, we do have the figure right here. So the N400 is an event-related potential. And it's oftentimes done to study what's going on in the brain regarding these semantic networks. So the N400 is a negativity, that's what the N stands for, that occurs. I'm trying to think, anyone know what that 400, anyone take a guess what that 400 stands for? Take a guess what that 400 stands for? It's an event-related potential. That 400 stands for the amount of time after the presentation of some stimulus. So the N400 is a negativity 400 milliseconds after the presentation of a stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is a target. But it always, in the N400 paradigm involving semantic expectations, there's always a prime. The prime can either be semantically related to the target, so that would be like apple, and then you're measuring the neural response to the word fruit. They're semantically related. Semantically not related would be like I show you the prime word target, and then, or sorry, I show you the prime word doctor, and then you evaluate the word fruit. So that would be unrelated. Doctor is the prime for the unrelated word fruit. There's a semantic mismatch. They're not part of the same category there compared to when it's apple and fruit. They are part of the same semantic category. So the N400 is the fact that you get this negativity when there's this semantic mismatch or when the semantic structures are different. And I'll show you the figure. I guess I can show it to you right now. This is kind of a complicated figure, but it's the one that I have to show you. And so the crucial thing, this category exemplar stuff, ignore this. Really what I care about is related versus unrelated. And so let's go here to this thick red dashed line. This is the unrelated condition. And you can see you have this big peak. By the way, in this graph, the negativity is up, positivity is down. And so you get this huge negativity that occurs. Each one of these is 100, 200, 300, 400 milliseconds. At around 400 milliseconds right here, you get this huge negativity, this peak right here that occurs when the semantic structure of the prime and the target are unrelated. And you can see here, there's similarly here, you get an N400 in the yellow dotted line, which is another example of unrelated words, compared to the solid lines, the blue and the red, where the negativity is significantly smaller. In this one particular one, the solid red line, these are when the semantic structures are related. So this would be like doctor is a prime for nurse, or apple is a prime for fruit. The two words, the prime and the target, are semantically related. The N400 is significantly reduced, or it's completely eliminated for the red solid line. There is a little bit of one for the blue solid line. But the idea basically is the N400, this brain response, the negativity 400 milliseconds after a target, the negativity is significantly higher if the target is semantically not related to the prime. If the target and the prime are semantically related, the N400 will be significantly smaller if they are related. Questions or comments about the N400 event-related potential? Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is the implicit association test. Yeah, it needs the name. So I don't have the name on the slide, but it'd be helpful. It's called the implicit association test. And this only kind of fits in with the rest of the chapter, okay? But this is our last day, and this is just it's a really important finding in cognitive psychology. It's a reaction time finding, so it fits in with the chapter, okay, because there's a lot of reaction time findings. But this kind of deviates away from the semantic network idea pretty strongly. But these are just really important findings, and I really wanted to talk about them before this course ends. So I'm going to talk about the implicit association test. And so in the implicit association test, I think I have some pictures here. You'll be shown pictures like this. I have an implicit association test on my computer, and I've screenshotted some of the stimuli. And so the implicit association test, you would see things like this. This is a white face. And on the the task is you see the thing in the middle of the screen and you have to categorize it as either belonging to the left side of the screen, in which case you would press one letter on the keyboard like A, or it belongs on the right side of the screen, in which case you would press like L or something like that. So one letter means this goes over here, and another letter means it goes over here. And this is a picture of a white face. And so the correct answer here would be left side of the screen. This is a white American. Similarly, now here's a word, pleasure. And your task as the participant is to classify, does this belong in the left category or does this belong over here for the two categories? So is it one over here on these two categories on the left side, or one of these two categories that are on the right side? And pleasure is a word which is good. And so you would probably say that the correct answer is over here on the left side of the screen. So moving forward, this here now is a black face. And so here you would see, this picture right here, and the answer would be the right side of the screen. So your job as the participant is the answer left, right, left, right. You're categorizing the thing shown in the center of the screen is either belonging in these things on the left side of the screen or these things that belong on the right side of the screen. You always answer left, right, left, right. That's the answer. It's always going to be left or right. And then this is the same task here, but this is actually a different condition. And you notice, so looking here, this is the one I was showing you just a second ago. In this one, good and white are on the same side, and bad and black are on the same side over here. So that's one condition, which is usually called like the congruent condition. It's congruent with racial stereotypes. Here is shown what's usually referred to as the incongruent. And you've noticed now that the categorizations up here have been flip-flopped. Good and bad are in the same place. Good and bad are in the same place. But I flip-flop black and white American. They're on the other sides of the screen now. It used to be good and white American and bad black American. Now we switched them. But you as the participant in the incongruent condition are performing the same task. You see this face right here, and you have to categorize it. Does it belong on the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen? The correct answer here would be the right side of the screen because it's a white American or it's a white person. You see the word pleasure here, and you would have to say the correct answer is left because pleasure is a good word. You see the black face right here, and the correct answer would be it belongs to the left side of the screen because this is a black person's face right here. And so this is the implicit association test. Usually you'll do like 100 or 150 trials of the same thing over and over. Usually like the first half of the experiment will be congruent trials where good and white and bad and black are paired together. And then the second half of the trials will be the incongruent trials where good and black are paired together and bad and white are paired together. And the question is, between the congruent and incongruent conditions, in which of these two conditions are participants' reaction times tend to be quicker? In which of these two conditions are people faster at categorizing whether the thing in the center of the screen belongs on the left or the right? And the answers are right here. Reaction times are usually faster in the congruent condition. When white is paired with good on one side of the screen and black is compared with bad, people's ability to categorize the objects in the center of the screen, the words and the faces in the center of the screen, is faster here in the so-called congruent condition, congruent with racial stereotypes, presumably. I'm not a huge fan of the terms congruent and incongruent, but that's oftentimes how it's called. So in the congruent condition, reaction times tend to be quicker. In the incongruent condition, which is once again incongruent with so-called racial stereotypes, people are relatively slower. They have a more difficult time performing the task when white American is paired with bad on one side of the screen and black American is paired with good on the other side of the screen. that's harder for people. They're significantly slower in that situation. If I've replicated this, the effects are actually pretty darn strong. I include it in one of the laboratory experiments in my psychophysiology course that I teach, and I'm able to replicate this. I've replicated this in many different student groups at my old job at Augustana College, here at KU. Every single time I've done this experiment, I get the same results where people are faster in the congruent condition relative to the incongruent condition. And so it's a study which has been proposed as a potential measure of like people's racial bias. The people that are most biased racially will perform very good in the congruent task because they have these strong racial stereotypes. They associate the idea of whiteness with good and the idea of blackness with bad. That's kind of what maybe their semantic network looks like in their mind. And so it causes them to be able to categorize things quicker when things are structured this way. And they're relatively slower here because they associate white with good. And so it's very difficult for them to do the task when white is in the same side of the screen as bad. And it's very difficult for them to associate the idea of black with good, people that have high racial bias. And so, yeah, the effects are really strong, at least in the Americans that I've measured this. And I will say most of the people that I've tested have been, white students. An interesting theoretical question is, would you see a difference in performance depending on the race of the participants? And it's actually an experiment that I would very much like to perform. It's just, it's difficult because unfortunately, there's still a large proportion of the people at colleges are white. So that's the implicit association test. And that's some of the research. It's vaguely connected to this idea of semantic networks. And that is all I have to talk about in chapter 7. Does anyone have any questions about the implicit association test before we call it a day on chapter 7 and go over the study guide? All right. So I'm going to bring up the study guide here. The study guide is posted on Blackboard. And here it is. This is the stuff that will be on the test. So I have decided that I'm going to include some stuff that we've already been tested over, some of what I view as core concepts in the course, but you're not going to have any mystery as to which of these concepts. So the chapters that are most relevant to the current test are chapters 5, 6, and 7. We only talked about just a couple things in chapter 7. We talked about, a few things in chapter 6. We talked about a lot in chapter 5, so the majority of the questions will come from chapter 5. But I've decided that I'm going to include a small amount of questions from chapters 2, 3, and 4 about these very specific topics. And I'll remind you of the extra credit opportunity. If you have a question about one of these, that you don't understand one of these concepts, then send me an email saying, I need to know more about so-and-so. And if you say that, then I will send you a question with some guidance as to how to answer it. And then that'll be your extra credit opportunity. It's in the in-class quizzes folder on Blackboard. You can answer the questions that I give you with the guidance that I'll give you, turn those in. And if you do a decent job, you'll get 2 points out of 0, which will be counted as extra credit. So I'll take a little bit of time and I'll just kind of go through. Hopefully you've had a little bit of time to read through the study guide. I'll go through some of these things and kind of give you a little bit of guidance of the nature of the questions that I might be asking. But if you can ask questions that will kind of guide what I talk about now, that could be very helpful as well. But I'll just kind of give you a couple instances of things that I could talk about. For instance, the method used in the composite face effect. I want to remind you that this is the study where people pay attention to the top halves of the faces, and that holistic perception and the composite task actually hurts people's performance. in the aligned condition of the composite face task, people actually perform with less accuracy than in the unaligned condition. In the aligned condition, people are using holistic face perception, but that causes people to have problems. And so make sure that you understand the method of the composite face effect so that you understand why face alignment causes these detrimental effects of performance in the composite face task. Another question, I can basically guarantee you there will be a question here because this is an important concept. We talked about those shadowing studies from chapter 3. These are shadowing, to recall, is that using dichotic listening, you hear one thing in the left ear, you hear one like speech sentence in the left ear, another speech sentence in the right ear. In the shadowing task, you have to listen, or you have to repeat what you hear in one ear and ignore what you hear in the other. But oftentimes in these studies, the researchers are actually interested in, even though he's ignoring this ear, what was the stuff that he was able to process in the ignored ear? Even though he wasn't paying attention, what stuff was the participant able to process in that ear? And the nature of the things that people are able to process in the ignored ear has been been taken to support these early and late filter theories of attention. For instance, does anyone remember what was the example? The thing that people are really good at hearing in the ignored ear that was support for the late filter theory of attention. So there's one type of thing that really pops out to people as they hear it in the ignored ear, even when they're not paying attention. They still often hear it. And it's support for late filter theories. Does anyone remember what was the type of thing that people are really good at hearing in the ignored ear? You remember that? The name is correct, which supports the late filter theory of attention. So make sure I also presented I presented one other study that also supports the late filter theory. Make sure you understand that. I also presented a study which supports the early filter theory. Make sure you understand that. So I think there's 3 studies related to these early and late filter theories, all related to the shadowing paradigm of dichotic listening. So make sure you understand those. Make sure you understand the instructions in the Stroop task. Make sure you understand how the line bisection task works. All this thing has to do with attention. Another question which you are virtually guaranteed to see on the test will concern the evidence supporting primacy and recency effects. Primacy effects and recency effects. Recency involves short-term memory. Primacy involves long-term memory, at least in theory. These are the theories. And I provided some evidence that recency effects rely more strongly on short-term memory and primacy effects rely more on long-term memory. I'm going to ask the 2 questions that I'll guarantee you I will ask in the test. There will definitely be a question about early versus late filter theories. There'll definitely be a question about the composite face task. There'll definitely be a study regarding the previous studies on primacy and recency effects. So I think everything that I've gone over so far, you basically have guaranteed that these will be on the test. I'll kind of skip around. I mean, there's lots of stuff here that I could ask good questions about, but I've highlighted 3 so far. I'm now moving into some of the stuff that we've talked about more recently. Without a doubt, there will definitely be questions that require you to understand the difference between declarative and non-declarative memory. Would anyone be willing to kind of explain the difference between declarative and non-declarative memory, just kind of a basic definitional, how are declarative and non-declarative memories kind of different as far as the definitions that I provided? Can anyone kind of give us a definition here?
Declarative are things that you can like verbally explain, whereas non-declarative is more procedural, like motor memory.
Yeah, great. Yeah, declarative memories usually can be verbalized. I often say they're like facts about yourself or facts about the world. Please remember that there are 2 different types of declarative memory. I could ask about those subtypes of declarative memory. And yes, non-declarative memory is the best example would be procedural memories, things that your body is able to do and which you form memories of. Can anyone give me an example of what is an example of a motor memory that would be what is an example of a non-declarative procedural memory? Can anyone give me, remember one of the examples that I gave or provide a new example?
Riding a bike.
Good. Yeah, that would be an example of something your body just kind of knows how to do. And if someone asks you, how do you know how to keep balanced on a bike? You're like, I don't know, I just can do it. But of course, I remember my mom helping me ride my bike, and it took for a while, and I couldn't do it. But then eventually, one day, it kind of clicked. Presumably, my body had gradually formed the memory of how to keep balance on the bike, and then it's something you never lose. Good. That's an example that I didn't give. So that's a really good example. The examples that I gave were also things like um, certain sports maneuvers, like a golf swing or a tennis serving, or how to play songs on a musical instrument by memory. Your body just kind of knows how to do it after a while. There'll definitely be questions making sure you understand the difference between declarative versus non-declarative memory. Um, there was very highly likely to be a question about the word stem completion. Word stem completion is an example of non-declarative memory. So it's not a, it's a, an example, it's one of the examples of a non-declarative memory, but it's not a procedural memory. It's not, it's one of the examples of non-declarative memory, which is not a procedural memory. So word stem completion is considered an implicit task, or it's related to non-declarative memory, at least in theory. And I gave some examples, or I gave like a demonstration involving two different lists of words, and then a word stem completion type of task. And we talked about how the different lists of words would influence performance in the word stem completion task. And so I want you to understand that demonstration. And in general, I want you to remember that word stem completion is considered an implicit or non-declarative type of task. Let's see what else we got here. There'll definitely be a question about the testing effect. I gave 3 examples of that. And I think it's pretty straightforward, but if you have questions about the testing effect, email me about that. There will probably be a question, probably 2 questions, about the role of medial temporal lobe structures in declarative memory. We already know from patient HM, he had his medial temporal lobe, including his hippocampus and some surrounding structures, removed. Because I want to remember, the patient HM, was his impairment in declarative or non-declarative memory? Does anyone remember this? Well, I'll say it was in declarative memory. And we know that his impairment was in declarative memory, and we know that he was still able to do non-declarative memory type tasks. Does anyone remember the example of the non-declarative memory task that he was able to perform? Anyone remember that example? Well, maybe this is something you should do. I'm not going to give this one away for free in the study session, but that's a question I'm highly likely to ask about as well. What was the task? The HM definitely had impairments to his declarative memory, but his non-declarative memory was intact based on performance in a non-declarative task that he performed, but he was good at, and he learned over time, and he was able to get better over time. So make sure you understand that. I did talk about it in a previous lecture in chapter 5. And I'll probably ask a question about consolidation theory as well. Some more recent stuff. Understand the terms that we talked about in chapter 6. So first off, I guess understand the demonstrations of false memory, involving like the pair example and the window example of false memories. Understand these terms in particular, understand what a schema is, selection and reconstructive retrieval. A question I'm highly likely to ask about would be, what is the difference between selection and reconstructive retrieval? They're both, they both have some similarities in that they both involve schema, but there's also some important differences between selection and reconstructive retrieval. So make sure you understand what the differences are there. Yeah, and all this other stuff is kind of fresh in our mind, so we're talking about it today. So I'm not going to go over too much of this stuff today, but I will give you guys, if you have questions, the opportunity to ask questions over anything that you saw on the study guide, anything that we talked about today or in recent lectures that's unclear. Now would be a good time to talk about it. Anyone have questions or comments? Okay, fair enough. So go ahead if if you want to do extra credits, you can definitely ask follow-up questions about this stuff. I'll stop recording now. So yeah, send me the extra credit topics if you want to ask. If you want to have extra credit, I'll send you some questions, answer those, turn them in on Blackboard by I think I said Saturday at 11:59 p.m. And then you'll be good regarding those 2 points as long as you answered decently. If you just want to have questions or you have set up Zoom meeting for office hours, I'm definitely happy to do that as well.